The Jeff Younger Show is on. Dedicated to my sons, James and Jude. Education. Not the credential collecting system that you suffered through, but education as the Romans understood it. Medicina mentis, medicine for the mind. A tool for diagnosing your weaknesses and curing them. Then for taking your strengths and pushing them to their absolute limit. Most men think education ended when they got their degree. But that's the first mistake. Real education begins when you identify what's broken in you and systematically fix it. How did Romans think about education differently than we do? Well, it had a fundamentally different purpose. Modern education exists to produce credentials and sort of sort people into economic slots. It treats everyone the same and forces them through identical curricula, and it calls it success when you can perform well on standardized tests. Roman education existed to form men of capability and character. It was diagnostic and remedial. You studied specific subjects to cure specific defects in your nature. Are you imprecise in thought? Study philosophy. Are you careless in execution? Study mathematics. Are you inarticulate? Study rhetoric and writing. Are you unimaginative? Study literature and poetry. The goal wasn't to make you well-rounded, like modern dumbasses say. It was to make you formidable. Formidable. To fix what's weak and to perfect what's strong. Let me walk you through the Roman understanding of what this really means. Education is formation. It is like the deliberate shaping of a man's mind and character. The Latin word educatio comes from educere, to lead out or to draw forth. It doesn't mean to pour information in. It means to develop what's already there and make it excellent. Romans understood that men are born with different natural capacities and different defects. Kind of fucking boring, isn't it? You've been watching for 15 minutes. In a few seconds, what are you going to do? Scroll to the next thing? That's what the platform wants you to do, man. That's what the establishment wants you to do. That's what the man wants you to do. But here's what I've noticed. The men who change their lives don't just consume. They don't just scroll. They don't just sit here like worms, seeing what the algorithm's going to feed them. They curate what they read. They curate what they study. They curate what they watch. They curate what goes in their brains. They build a feed that makes them stronger, not weaker. So look, subscribing is not about loyalty to me. It's about what you're choosing to see. It's about whether your information diet is building you up or numbing you out. Is it a 1 gram per pound of body weight protein diet, or is it going to be some high carb diet that's going to fatten your ass up? You decide what's in your feed. I'm just one channel, man. But if this channel has moved the needle at all for you, maybe your feed should have more of this and less of whatever else is making you fat, lazy, and stupid. So subscribe, click the bell, or just keep scrolling. Just know which one you're choosing now. Some men are naturally precise but lack imagination. Others are imaginative but sloppy. Some are articulate but shallow. Others think deeply but can't communicate. Raw nature is not enough. Every man has weaknesses that will cripple him if left uncorrected. Every man has strengths that will remain mediocre if not deliberately perfected. Education is thus the systematic correction of weaknesses and the deliberate perfection of strength. Here's why that matters. Romans did not see this as abstract or theoretical. It didn't mean, seeing how well you did on tests to see if we made you, quote, strong. Didn't mean that. They asked, what does this subject do to a man's mind and soul? What capacity does this develop? What defect does it cure? And then they prescribed subjects the way a physician prescribes medicine, specific remedies for specific problems. You might be asking, how could this actually work? Well, let me give you a diagnostic approach. First of all, you want to start with an honest self-assessment. Most men cannot do this. because they confuse what they wish they were with what they actually are. This is especially true of young men who have a heroic vision of themselves. But if you want to fix yourself, you need to know what's actually broken. Here are some questions. Where do you consistently fail? Where do you wind up making the same mistakes repeatedly? What do other competent people see in you that you wish they didn't? What comes hard to you that seems easy for others? Write down your answers. These are your defects. They're not permanent conditions, man. They're curable problems. It's like saying, hey, I don't squat enough. My back squat's not high enough. The other guys on the football team back squat more than me. I need to work on my back squat. That's how you think about this stuff, right? This isn't like some character defect or something you're born with, right? Everyone has a condition. Everyone has a weakness. They're all curable, right? And every condition has a corresponding remedy in the classical subjects. Okay, now that you've identified your weaknesses, identify your strengths. What comes naturally? What do you do better than most people without trying? These aren't just nice traits. They're the raw material that you're going to use to perfect into genuine excellence if you work at them systematically. Now, here's the Roman insight. Listen to me. You cannot ignore either your strengths or your weaknesses. If you only work on strengths, your weaknesses are just going to sabotage you. If you only fix weaknesses, you'll be merely adequate at everything and excellent at nothing. Okay? You need both. You have to eliminate weaknesses and perfect your natural strengths. All right? Let's break down the major subjects and what they cure. The classical liberal arts, right? These are the subjects the Romans considered essential for a free man. They show you what kind of a guideline or rubric for like what you could study. I'm going to show you what each one of those does to your mind. Philosophy. This is medicine for imprecision and muddled thinking. If you can't distinguish between essential and accidental, if you confuse correlation and causation, if you accept contradictions without noticing them, man, you need philosophy. Philosophy teaches you how to think with precision. It forces you to define your terms, to distinguish what actually follows from what merely seems to follow, to identify hidden assumptions in arguments. It's painful at first because it reveals just how sloppy most of your thinking actually is. Frankly, you'll have trouble at first even reading philosophy. But it's the foundation of a lot, and you should try. My advice to you is start with logic. Learn to recognize valid and invalid reasoning, and then move on to metaphysics and epistemology, the questions of what exists and how you can know it. Do not start with ethics. Ethics is worthless until you can think precisely about reality. And let me talk a little bit about studying logic. I do not recommend that you study formal logic or informal or even most forms of informal logic. I definitely don't think you should do any kind of critical thinking courses or read any critical thinking books. What you should do is study informal logic using natural deduction. I prefer the Gensen system. It's the easiest one to get your head around. It relies on just your natural intuition about how the world works. Once you have a good handle on a natural deduction, informal logic, then you can move on to formal logic, and the absolute best way to do that is to study geometry. Geometry will make you extremely precise and rigorous in your thinking. That brings me to mathematics. Mathematics doesn't just teach you to calculate. I mean, calculators do that. That's not mathematics. What calculators do is not mathematics, obviously. Mathematics teaches you exactness. It teaches you that every step must follow necessarily from the previous step, or it isn't correct. There's no kind of in mathematics. It trains your mind to be careful, to check your work, to recognize when something isn't quite right, even if you can't immediately see the error. Well, let me give you an example. One time I was at a whiteboard and I was doing a particularly difficult calculus problem. And I had two advisors. I had a philosophy advisor and a math advisor were in the room while I worked this on the whiteboard and talked through this problem. It was a problem that I invented myself and discovered myself, so they were keen to see how I would respond to it. And all throughout the presentation, they just laughed and chuckled. And at the end, the whole room busted out laughing. And I felt kind of funny because I didn't know what they were laughing at. And my math advisor, Dr. White, seeing that I was at a sconce, said, do you realize what you did? I said, I have no idea. He said, you dropped a sign at every step in the calculation, but you did it in such a way that at the end, it still worked out and you got the right answer. And we're all marveling at how your mistakes still turned out right. I started studying mathematics precisely for this reason. I was imprecise in writing things down. It wasn't that I thought imprecisely about them. I wrote them down imprecisely. And over years of mathematics, I cured myself of that. The best way to do this is to work through geometry. The classical way is to use Euclid's elements. I think it's better to use, actually these days, a discovery learning course. There's a good discovery learning. You can go to the Journal of Inquiry-Based Mathematics. You get a discovery learning course called Euclidean and Non-Euclidean Mathematics. And it has a mini logic course at the beginning, and then you can prove theorems on your own. It more accords with our modern understanding of axioms. I think it's a little more clear than working through the elements. It also, I think, is more interesting because it gets into areas of modern geometry where we don't assume the parallel postulate in Euclid, right? We have 3 different kinds of geometries that you can explore, and you will have an insight that there are many kinds of geometries, and you can apply them to different problems. So that's what I would recommend that you do if you work through geometry. But the point is not to do it because, you're going to like prove things and publish them in math journals. It's because by doing rigorous proofs and subjecting them to the critique of other people, you're going to create a quality in your mind that transfers to everything you do, precision and rigor. And I've got to tell you, of all the things I see in young people today that I have hired, that I work with, that I deal with in politics, that I even deal with just casually and even on social media, they bring to the table very little rigor. And that in the end reduces the gravitas that you have. You're not going to be taken seriously, okay? We talk about, Tucker Carlson recently did some interviews with Nick Fuentes. Well, the reason Nick Fuentes is taken seriously and as a young man has achieved gravitas is because he's rigorous in his thinking and his presentation. And a good way to learn that is to study geometry. You can also, use a medicine from grammar and rhetoric. This is medicine for inarticulateness, right? If you know what you mean, but you can't say it, if people are constantly misunderstanding you, if you lose arguments that you should win, you need systematic study of language. All right? Grammar teaches you the architecture of language, how sentences actually work, how to construct thought so it's clear and precise. Not the fake grammar you learned in school, like don't split infinitives, don't end sentences with prepositions. Actually, none of that's true. You can actually end sentences with prepositions. It's just fine. It's a rule to live by. You see that I just did that. I'm talking about real grammar, how to order thought for maximum clarity and impact, right? This is what's often called functional grammar. There's a really good book that you can get called Rhetorical Grammar. Highly recommend it. It shows you the rhetorical effects of different grammar constructions. It shows that in English, there's only 7 fundamental sentence structures, and they have different rhetorical effects that you can change through subordination. And you realize, for example, that English works mainly through adding subordinate phrases and clauses. English works through subordinate. You start with a main idea, and then you put subordinate ideas on it to modify it. That's how English works. Other languages like Spanish don't work that way. And other, like most Romance languages, they work through coordination, parallel constructions that have a relationship of equals. In English, we typically don't do that. That's one thing English kind of has in common with Greek and Latin, in that, if you read Attic Greek, for example, it's really just subordinate phrase stacked on subordinate phrase with one simple main stem, right? They kind of thought and wrote that way. But those insights into how your language works will help you form thoughts in a way that are very powerful to other people. And that brings me to rhetoric, right? Rhetoric teaches you the weapons of persuasion, okay? If grammar is, learning to throw a grenade, to shoot a rifle, what we used to say in the Marine Corps, to shoot, move, and communicate, the tactics. Rhetoric is the strategy of what should you do and how can you deploy those weapons the best way. You should not think of rhetoric as manipulation techniques, but legitimate tools for making truth compelling. If you're explaining something that people don't understand the importance of, rhetoric will tell you how to argue and how to appeal to different audiences and how to structure a case and even how to handle objections. The Romans knew something that, frankly, we've forgotten today, that being right is not enough. Okay. You have to be able to make your rightness persuasive. You have to, if you want to have an effect in the world. The way to begin here with grammar and rhetoric is to start with writing. Force yourself to write clearly every single day. And then study speeches, both ancient and modern, and just identify techniques. You'll just start developing pattern matching by reading speeches. And then practice speaking. Most men are really terrible at all three because they just never systematically study these things, okay? I recommend a book by a man named Verlin Klinkenborg, and it's called Several Short Sentences About Writing. And it will free you from your fears of writing, and it will thereby free your mind to notice things. It's really a book about noticing things and then how to write things that you notice down. I think it's a very powerful book. You should check it out. Literature and poetry is another medicine. It's for lack of imagination and an impoverished inner life. If you're prosaic, you can't see possibilities beyond the immediately obvious. If you have no sense of beauty or excellence, you need serious engagement with literature. This is not, I want to be clear about this. This is not about feelings or self-expression. I don't believe in that bullshit. All right. What literature shows you is the full range of human possibilities, how people think, what drives them, how they fail and succeed. It develops your capacity to understand people even unlike yourself, people that, if you look at, for example, literary science fiction, people that are so beyond yourself that you have no ability to relate to them, to see situations from multiple perspectives, sometimes even to discover that there are perspectives you never knew even existed, and to recognize patterns in human behavior. Aristotle points out that he says, without the phantasma, there is no thinking. There can be no thinking without the images, the phantasma, he calls them, the images. These images are what you imagine. Your imagination, believe it or not, is the key to good reasoning. If you are a person who has a poor imagination, you can't reason well. It's just that simple. So literature and poetry especially, can bolster your imagination. Poetry can also train the aesthetic sense, right? Your ability to distinguish excellent from mediocre, to recognize when something is as good as it can be versus just merely adequate. And this matters far beyond poetry. A man with no aesthetic sense cannot recognize excellence in any field. Let me give you an example. If you talk to computer programmers, the top computer programmers, most of the judgments they make in programming, this is before they have data like on performance characteristics or whatever, are aesthetic criteria. They will say things like, well, I did that because it was more beautiful than the alternative. They have aesthetic judgments they're making about the code. Similarly with mathematics and physics, aesthetic considerations of beauty drive actually most research programs in mathematics and physics. The nice thing about poetry is that it condenses language into this little small space where you can look at it and the effects of language and the power of language in this super condensed space in a very short time period. Like, good poetry is short because it's trying to achieve an emotional affect that can't last. You can't have a powerful emotion for a long time. It's like these guys that go and do weight work and say, I did a 4-hour intense workout. No, you didn't. If it was an intense workout, it wouldn't last longer than 30 minutes because you'd have been worn out by 30 minutes. That's what intensity means. Poetry's like that. It's short and intense. And that compression lets you learn more than you could in an extended piece of prose. There's two schools of thought on this. I'm going to give you my own. My own opinion is that you should read the Greeks and Romans first. You should read Homer, Virgil, the tragedies. You should read Aeschylus, Sophocles, the satires, and not because they're old, but because they're the foundation for everything that comes after, right? Read Shakespeare. Read Boccaccio and Shakespeare. If you read Boccaccio and Shakespeare, Shakespeare stole most of his plots and story ideas from Boccaccio. If you read both of them, with Boccaccio, you get the plots of almost every story that's been told. You'll recognize every movie you ever saw in the Decameron, okay? And in Shakespeare, you have excellent use of that raw material. So you can see how Shakespeare used Boccaccio's ideas, right? And that shows you how you get real benefit, how you can advance and become better from things that were old, right? Always focus on reading the best. You have to stop reading shit, right? Don't read slop. That means if you're a woman, no romance novels, right? But most of my audience is men. That means no more bullshit, woke science fiction novels, no more junky novels that just keep you entertained or whatever. What you need to do is read literature, stuff that over hundreds of years people have said is the best thing to read. Because you only know if something's really good if it stands the test of time, okay? Do not read junk. Just stop reading that stuff. All right, history is another medicine. It's medicine for short-term thinking, failure to learn from experience, or lack of pattern matching abilities. If you keep making the same mistakes, if you're surprised by predictable outcomes, if people can see ahead when you can't see ahead and predict things that you can't predict, you need to study history. History isn't about memorizing dates and battles. It's a laboratory of human nature. Like, for example, if you read the Peloponnesian War, you basically have every known form of government that's ever existed, and in diverse ethnicities and diverse cultures, in diverse geographical situations, all colliding together. And you can learn a lot about politics and how people from different cultures interact and what are the likely patterns from their interactions, okay? This is the kind of stuff you can learn from history. Pattern matching is how you develop a predictive capacity, right? So you're not going to study history to memorize the dates, man, or just to tell people you know some stuff about the American Revolution or whatever. What you're trying to find are patterns in human action, patterns in societies, patterns in war, patterns in peacetime. You will never find a more productive historical subject than studying the interwar period between World War I and World War II, the so-called period of peace, and studying the period of so-called peace between, the signing of the Constitution to the Civil War, and looking at the periods of peace between the Athenians and the Spartans, right? The study of these periods of peace are extremely useful because what you'll see is that patterns emerge that inevitably lead to war and conflict. So you study history to see these patterns, but it could be other things like you live in a republic if you're American. How do republics fall? You live in a time of propaganda. How do demagogues gain power? How do seemingly stable, powerful economic systems just suddenly collapse? There's such a thing as economic history. Maybe you should read it. There's a really good book called The Story of Risk, which is a history of economic risk and how people have dealt with it. How do competent men lose to inferior opponents, which has happened more often than not throughout history? These are not abstract questions. They're actually tactical intelligence for the present, all right? My advice is to you is to start with the following. Start with Thucydides, particularly the Peloponnesian War, Plutarch, Tacitus, and Livy. Learn to read history not as a kind of narrative, but as scenes for pattern recognition. How did one thing give us the next thing? You're more interested in the plot than the events. Does that make sense? All right. Another medicine is music. Music is medicine for lack of discipline and an inability to sustain complex efforts. I mean, if you've ever tried to learn a musical instrument, you will know what I'm talking about. Okay. If you can't maintain focus through difficulty, if you give up when mastery requires some sustained effort, right? You're one of those people, you need music, right? Learning an instrument teaches you something crucial, the relationship between daily practice and long-term mastery. You can't fake proficiency in music. It's a publicly performed skill. You either put in the hours of deliberate practice or you just remain mediocre. And there's just no shortcuts, no hacks, and no way around the work. All right. This transfers to a lot of stuff. A man who's mastered an instrument has trained himself to sustain effort through a frustrating period that we all go through when you're not good enough, but you do know what good would look like. It's really frustrating, right? You know what good looks like, but you can't do it, right? And that's a capacity that most modern men lack entirely. It's a capacity that most modern young men lack. And honestly, in the last 10 years, I've only met one or two young men that have that capacity. So I would say pick an instrument and commit to, some serious practice. Not because you want to be a musician, but because the experience of achieving mastery through sustained discipline and effort is going to change how you approach everything else. You'll also learn something in music that you literally cannot learn any other way, and that's rhythm. My analytics tell me that 90% of you watching right now are not subscribed. 90%, which means most of you are basically sneaking in through the back door, grabbing some free coffee, and leaving before anyone asks you to sign in. All right, look, I respect the hustle. I'm a hustler. I've done it myself. But here's the thing. YouTube's algorithm sees that. It thinks, nobody's subscribing, so this content must not be valuable. Then it shows my videos to fewer people, or worse, shows me to assholes or weak men. So you're not just freeloading, my friend. You're actually hurting the operation. Look, I'm not mad. I'm just saying, if you like this, maybe stop being part of the 90%, subscribe, or at least feel a little guilty about not doing it. Rhythm and timing. And here's the thing. Rhythm and timing sounds so abstract, but rhythm and timing are how you win at everything, right? You have to be on time, right? And you have to be in time with other people in order to make things work. That's essentially what project management is. I've managed $10 million projects. It's essentially rhythm and timing that I manage. It's not people, right? But it also occurs in physical training. I mean, if you look at great boxers, they're not great because of their techniques. They're great because they have an incredible sense of rhythm and timing, and that's how they beat people. Read, or observe the great sword masters. Miyamoto Musashi, for example, wrote a book called The Book of Five Rings about swordsmanship. This is a guy who killed 100 people in duels and never lost. And he said the primary study is rhythm and timing. It's not techniques, right? If you can hit somebody with a sword, you can kill them, obviously, right? The issue is, getting to the right place at the right time in harmony with the opponent so you don't get cut and you cut him, right? It's all about rhythm and timing, which brings me to physical training, right? Medicine and physical training is for the weakness of your will and possibly your disconnection from your own body. If you're soft, if you quit when things hurt, if your body feels like a stranger to you, you don't feel comfortable in your own body, you need systematic physical training. And I have never met a man that doesn't require this. This is the most important thing I do every day. All right. Romans do something that we've forgotten. The condition of your body affects the condition of your mind. Why is that? Because the mind and the body are not separate. The soul, the mind, and the body are all one thing. A disciplined body means a disciplined mind. Physical training isn't about appearance. This is another problem with modern workout, stuff. It's really all just bodybuilding and about appearance, right? It's about should be about developing the will to push through discomfort and to do what's hard because it's necessary. Physical training develops the will, not just the mind. You want to train for strength and endurance. These are the traits that you need for fighting. Learn to push past the point where you want to quit. Not because suffering is good, but because you need to know you can do hard things when required. You get a new, the Marine Corps has this wonderful saying. It sort of remaps your understanding of this. When weakness leaves the body, it feels like pain. Pain is just weakness leaving the body. And so you learn to accept pain as a consequence of becoming better, right? I would also say, stop the fucking bodybuilding. I would say, go and train in combat sports. And I would particularly say, study boxing. And the reason I say boxing is a boxing gym is one of the few places you'll go where people go all out and get into a fight. You can go in and spar, and you can get into a real fight with people in the ring, okay? In boxing, people are really fighting. That's not true in most wrestling, right? That's not true in most jiu-jitsu. I also recommend that you study weaponry. And frankly, you should study weaponry before you study boxing. You'll get bad habits in boxing if you don't. If you ever have to use your physical capabilities, it's going to be against somebody who is not stupid enough to avoid the advantage of weaponry. Young men consume content endlessly today. Podcasts, videos, threads, just hours of information. And then they sit on their ass and they do nothing. They feel like they've learned something, but how do they know? They didn't do anything with it. So here's a small test for you. The smallest possible test that I could possibly give you. If this content is valuable to you, subscribe. One click. Takes 2 seconds. If you can't do that, if you scroll past because you'll do it later, ask yourself, how many other small actions are you avoiding? The men who build things act on small decisions quickly. They act now. The men who drift let small decisions slide. Which one are you? Subscribe or admit something to yourself. Everyone will take advantage of weaponry, okay? You're going to be fighting against people with weapons, and that's guns and blades, right? So my advice to you is to learn how to gunfight and how to fight with blades, and use boxing as an enhancer. Public speaking is also a medicine. It's medicine for fear and the ability to command attention. If you want gravitas, learn public speaking. If you're terrified of speaking, if you can't hold a room, if people seem to just ignore you and they don't listen to you, you need deliberate practice in public speaking, okay? This is different from writing or private conversation. Public speaking will force you to command attention, okay? To think on your feet. When you step up on the stage, you're the one directing the course of events. Nobody else in the audience is doing it. It's all on you. You may not be used to that. This is a great way to get used to it. It's terrifying precisely because you cannot fake it. It's public. It's kind of like musical performance. It's totally public. And if you're going to mess it up, you're just going to mess it up in public. Everyone will see it. My recommendation, if you have real problems with public speaking or you want to get really good at public speaking, is to join Toastmasters. Toastmasters is quite interesting. Some people come into Toastmasters so terrified that they can't even introduce themselves to people when they walk in the room. Okay, they have real issues. So Toastmasters start you off real simple. The first time you go to a Toastmasters meeting, they just ask you to stand up in front of everybody, say your name, and say one sentence about yourself. That's it. And from that basis, they'll build you all the way up to giving a 1-hour speech without notes. And they do it just by repetition and by helping other people do it. You see how it happens, right? Definitely join Toastmasters. Definitely worth it. Okay. How do you use these subjects to perfect your strengths? You talked about weaknesses and strengths. I've given you the medicines. How do you use them to perfect your strengths? Well, once you've identified and begun correcting a major defect, you want to turn your attention to these strengths. This is where you have the capacity to be excellent. People have natural talents. Some people are just born fast runners, okay? They can become excellent at that. I'm not a fast runner. I can correct that as a weakness. And, the way I did it in the Marine Corps is I'm the guy that, I would always carry the mortar tube and I'd carry a machine gun at the same time if I had to. I mean, I developed the ability to carry my combat load of of 69 pounds plus an additional 40 pounds. I would carry over 110 pounds for 50 miles. And consequently, the mortar guys loved me. Whenever I called for support, I got it, right? The machine gun guys loved me. Whenever I needed their help, I got it, right? I couldn't run as fast, but I was very strong. And so they called me the mule, I wasn't a thoroughbred racehorse. I was the mule that could carry everything, right? You find ways to capitalize on your strengths on the team that you're on, all right? But here's the Roman principle. Listen to what I'm saying, because I just gave you an example of it. Specialize after you generalize. First, achieve basic competence across all essential subjects. When I was in the Marine Corps, I was near 100% in all my tests. Only then did I decide to specialize in my infantry team as the mule, because that seemed to be where I could contribute the best with my natural strength rather than my speed. Okay, so you want to first get an introduction to all the subjects. This is basically kind of like if you're working out hard, you take supplements generally. And then if you find that you're not recovering fast enough, then you add in your creatine, right? If you find out you're low on energy, you add in some methylated B vitamins. You see what I mean? But first, you need good nutrition. Like if you just have shit nutrition, if you're drinking, Sonic shakes and Starbucks drinks all day, what does it mean to even specialize your nutrition? You can't do that, right? You need to first of all just have good nutrition. Same with this. You need to get a good general understanding. So go through all the subjects that we talked about and just get a light level of skill in all of them. Find which ones you're naturally good at, right? Then you can start talking about specialization. Let's take an example. Let's say that you're naturally articulate. You're a good speaker. Basic competence in rhetoric might make you good at persuasion. But if you study it deeply and you read all the great rhetoricians and you practice daily, you analyze great speeches, you understand the psychological principles behind persuasion and the moral imperative of the person who persuades, dude, you're going to become very formidable. Okay. You're going to become a guy that, is going to be a Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes type person, right? The difference between just good and being formidable is the systematic study of a natural strength. Does that make sense? Systematic study and improvement of a natural strength. Let's say that you're naturally analytical. That would be me. Basic logic obviously makes you decent at argument and it makes you good at counter argument. But if you study formal logic, the philosophy of science, you do advanced mathematics, you look at the great works of systematic thought like Frege's logic system and why it failed, you become capable of building rigorous systems of knowledge that other people just cannot match. Okay, I've made millions of dollars doing that, right? So I took a natural talent I had and I systematically developed it over a period of about 8 years. The key to this is not to confuse natural talent with developed excellence, right? Natural talent's common, man. I mean, I don't mean to downplay people's natural abilities. It's not my intention here. But everywhere you go, you're going to find talented people. You can go to Walmart and look at the people that work at Walmart, and you're going to find people that have talents that you just don't have, right? I watched a guy merchandising his store, which just had a super intuitive way of understanding what customers wanted and to present it to them first. And his section was making like 10 times more money than every other section of Walmart. That guy has a talent for that. I don't have a talent for that. I have to learn that. Okay. I don't have a talent for that. So you got to find your area. Then you go deep, and it's always the same. You study the masters. Okay. You study, then you write about what you've studied. You write about what you studied. You write about what you studied. Okay. Learning is just writing. You write about what you study, and then you practice deliberately to apply what you learned. Okay. The fact is, most people today think study is reading. But until you can write an essay about what you know, until you can write a research paper which constructs a conversation from the authorities into a coherent understanding so people can understand the state of this centuries-long conversation. Until you can do something like that, you have not studied. I'll be very clear about that. There's no studying without writing. There is no studying without writing. Finally, you have to go out and practice it and apply it. Why is that important? Remember I told you, without the phantasmata, there is no thinking. There's no cognition without the phantasmata. Your imagination will come together with practical application, and you'll come up with new ideas based on the ones that you've written about. Okay? There's an old saying in business that innovation happens on the shop floor. There's no way to be an innovator, an inventor, without problems that you have to solve. You have to find problems, right? So when you go out and do this deliberate practice after you've studied your area, go out and find problems and solve them. And your imagination and the horizon of possibilities will open up to you in ways that you will find very pleasurable and fascinating. Now, how is this different than modern education? Well, I mean, you've probably been through it. I went through the public school system. I mean, modern education is basically an industrial process, right? It's designed to, pour in. Remember, we said education is drawing out, not pouring in. Modern education is pouring in and then stamping a bunch of people through a standardized curricula and to just get a predictable output. It's just optimized for credentials and not capability. They don't care if you can do anything with what they teach you. Schools don't care if you can do anything. All they want to know is, did you reproduce it on a test? It treats everyone the same because individualized formation doesn't scale. You can't have a big school with lots of money and make lots of money by doing that. All right. Roman education wasn't like that. Roman education was essentially tutoring, what today we'd call tutoring. A master would work with individual students to develop their specific capabilities and correct their specific defects. It was very expensive and time consuming because the formation takes time and attention. We all do training. Here's something that most people don't understand. You're not just watching the algorithm. You think you're training yourself, but the algorithm is training you. Every scroll, every pause, every click, it's learning what keeps you passive, what keeps you compliant, what keeps you watching instead of doing. And it's good at its job, better than you think. But here's the thing, you can train it back. Subscribe to the channel and you're giving it an instruction. You're saying more of this, less of what you think I want. That's the only lever you have. Use it or don't. But understand, if you don't tell the machine what to feed you, it'll decide for you. And it won't decide based on what makes you stronger, like this thing, but on what makes the algorithm richer. Subscribe. Train the algorithm before it finishes training you. Now, I understand, look, we can't go back to that system, but we can adopt its principles for self-education because today you have access to all the information of the masters. People didn't have that in the past, right? So in a way, you can do this yourself. Again, you have to first diagnose yourself honestly. Second, you have to prescribe remedies deliberately. Third, you have to practice systematically. That involves reading, then writing, then applying. Reading, writing, and applying. You can't do it without writing, and you can't do it without applying. Fourth, you need to specialize strategically. Once you have general understanding, find where you're really good and specialize in that. And it may not be someplace that you thought. You'll be surprised when you start finding out about yourself. You go into these general subjects and you find, really unexpected things that you're capable of that other people find very difficult. And you'll just scratch your head like, how can that be art to people? Well, what if you're past college age? Like maybe you're 22 or 23. Well, Romans would have just laughed at that question, okay? Because they didn't think education ended at 21 or 22. They thought it ended at death, okay? A man who stopped learning at 22 is just barely formed. And, frankly, if you believe Plato or Socrates, Plato speaking through Socrates, you're not even capable of being educated till you're past the age of 30 because your passions rule you, right? Your intellect doesn't rule you, your passions rule you. So education maybe can't even happen until after you're 30, right? So the idea that, well, I'm past college age, why would I do it? I mean, it's laughable. It's silly. That, sure, I get you. The credential collecting phase of life, maybe that's over, okay? But formation of your soul never ends. You can begin studying philosophy at 35. You can start mathematics at 40. You can take up rhetoric at 50. I did it. Okay, ages. I didn't even go to college till I was 35. Imagine that, being around a bunch of 18-year-olds. That was hell. The question is just really whether you're willing to do the work or not, right? That's all you're limited by today. You can go on the internet and all the knowledge of the ancients and the entire world is available to you for free. That's never been true in the history of the world. Okay. The only thing that's holding you back is your willingness to do the work. I would argue that self-directed study after the age of 25 is actually the most effective way to go. Because now you're no longer forced to care about grades or requirements. You can focus entirely on developing a real capability. Like, you're going to know what you're weak at, and you can be ruthlessly selective about what you study. Okay. I went through a phase where I was very interested in symbolic AI. So I had to go get research papers from like the 1960s and 70s, and I had to learn these strange programming languages. And I developed all kinds of fascinating conjectures from that led into and were applied to systems in oil field refining optimization and natural gas pipeline optimization systems. Okay. And that just came out of an odd interest that I had. I can just be ruthlessly selective about what I want to study. I don't have to do what some damn professor tells me to read, right? Now, the disadvantage here is that you're not going to have any structure or accountability. So that's why most men quit. They get the books, they start strong, they fade after a couple of weeks. The solution to that is pretty simple. You just create a structure, schedule out times when you're going to take tests for yourself. Say I'm going to finish these chapters and I'm going to do this kind of work. I'm going to write this paper by this date. I mean, it's not really rocket science, right? You got to carve out time in your schedule. I have 3 hours, 4 times a week when all I do is study. I've carved that out of my day. I don't answer my phone. I don't talk to my friends. I don't do housework. I don't get on YouTube. I don't do anything. That's my time to study, right? Treat it like medicine. You have to give it to yourself in regular doses, right? And you have to take it seriously. Most men, frankly, can't do it. All right. So some of you out there may be fired up and saying, well, how do I get started? Right? How do I do this? All right. I'm going to give you a quick 1-year diagnostic program. And this is going to reveal your actual weaknesses and strengths. Spend months 1 through 3 doing a general reading in philosophy, right? Work through a basic logic text, learn to identify valid, invalid reasonings, study fallacies, practice analyzing arguments in the wild, and read a general history of philosophy, a good general history of philosophy. Months 4 through 6, start working on mathematics just a little bit. Work through the geometry course I recommended. You go to the Journal of Inquiry-Based Learning, you get Euclidean, non-Euclidean geometry, and you just start proving theorems out of that. It'll teach you how to do that. When you prove those theorems, you got to subject them to somebody else and let somebody else see if they're right and critique your proofs, and you'll learn from that. We're just talking about doing, months 4 through 6, force yourself to understand, proving things. You'll see kind of whether you're good at it or not, right? Months 7 through 9, work on rhetoric and writing. Why did I do logic and philosophy first? Because, before you study persuasion, you need to know how to determine what's true in order to persuade people of things that are actually true. You don't want to be a sophist. And rhetoric and writing should always go hand in hand, right? I would say during months 7 and 9, write at least 500 words daily. I write at least 1,500 words every day. Study 1 great speech a week. Practice presenting arguments out loud. Don't be afraid to talk to yourself. Aristotle's school was called the peripatetic school. Peripatetic means walking or ambulating, because the students would walk around talking to themselves all the time, practicing, right? You can do that yourself, right? And this is going to reveal whether you can communicate clearly, right? You give speeches to yourself, see if they sound good. Record them. Most people have phones, so record them, see if they sound good. Months 10 through 12, work on literature. I would say go back to Homer, Virgil, read one Shakespeare play, read one novel from the Western canon. Pick one. If you pressed me to give you one, I would say Stendhal's The Red and the Black. Write a brief analysis of it. And this will reveal whether you can engage with complex human situations, recognize patterns, whether you can paraphrase a story rather than tell it. And at the end of the year, you're going to have some understanding about where you're at and what you're strong at. And then you can prescribe your own course of study, right? Heavy doses of subjects where you're weak and deep specialization in subjects where you're strong, okay? Of course, during this time, you should be doing physical training. As I said, you should get gunfighting training and blade training and spend a year just doing those two things, nothing else, right? Get good at handling a handgun, a shotgun, and a rifle, right? And make yourself strong, right? You need to be able to run 3 miles. Okay. You need to be able to put 45 pounds on your back and walk 10 miles, right? You need to be able to do these things. What about practical skills though? Like, none of this is going to make you money, right? I know some of you out there saying that. Well, okay. Those kind of things are not what we mean by education. They're training for economic utility. By all means do them, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about education that forms your soul and forms you as a person. Training teaches you to perform specific tasks. Now, you need both, but don't ever confuse them. Most men get training and think they're educated. Classic example of this would be medical doctors. They're highly trained and completely uneducated, right? They've specialized in narrow tasks, but as thinkers, they're just fundamentally uninformed. And when you talk to medical doctors just uniformly, they have the shittiest reasoning. I mean, you get better reasoning, honestly, from a man who picks up your trash than you will from a medical doctor. Even though the medical doctor is highly trained, they're just uneducated. The Roman principle is this, though. You need to get educated first and then be trained. If you can't think precisely, speak clearly, understand patterns, recognize what excellence and success looks like, how are you going to be trainable? Honestly, how are you going to be trainable? Can you do them at the same time? Absolutely. So maybe during that 1 year, go and get you some training. Here's a training I would recommend to you. If you're looking around for something to be trained in, do HVAC training. Why would I say do HVAC training? Very simple. It involves electrical, mechanical, plumbing, all in one skill. You're going to get many skills if you learn HVAC. You'll be able to diagnose electronic equipment, right? Electronics. It has many skills all wrapped up into one trade. And frankly, HVAC training courses are very cheap. For $1,500 to $3,000, you can get into certification programs that last a year and are not very demanding on you. They're designed to be done after work at nighttime. I would say HVAC is a no-brainer if you want to. And then you've got a general education skills. Then you may say, hey, I want to specialize in electrics, maybe electronics, or maybe say, whoa, I like this mechanical stuff. I think I'm going to study mechanics. If you want some practical skills, you can do that. The reverse is not true, though. This is why it's important to start with general education or do them in parallel. If you're good at a job, that just doesn't make you educated. Like I said about doctors, you're useful, but your soul may be unformed, right? You're not excellent. You're not an excellent person. So here you go. I hear the objections. Jeff, you're saying there's a difference between being useful and being educated? You're damn right I am. Being useful means you serve someone else's purposes. Being educated means you're capable of determining and pursuing your own purposes. And these are fundamentally different conditions. And here's what I mean. A job is really, if you think about a job, is a form of voluntary slavery. It's not chattel slavery, but it is a kind of economic slavery where you're capital for someone else's business. You're a human tool for generating someone else's wealth. You trade your time, your energy, and your capabilities for money. That's the transaction. You're the input. Someone else's profit is the output. Okay, this is not a moral criticism of that transaction. It's just a description of reality. Remember, this show is a realist show. We deal with the world as it really is. Most men need jobs. Bills need to be paid. Families need to be fed. Economic survival requires selling your labor. Fine. That's fine. Do it. But be absolutely clear about what you're actually doing. You're renting yourself out as a human tool. That's the very definition of a slave. In fact, Aristotle defines a slave as a human tool. Your value in this transaction at a job is purely your utility to someone else's ends. That's why they call it human resources. You're just a resource, like timber, iron ore, or the toilet paper they buy for the bathroom. You get extracted, processed, used up, and replaced when you're no longer economically efficient. And that language tells you exactly what you are in that system. So don't fool yourself about a job, okay? Your goal is to become educated, and then you can maybe start your own business and become independent so that you can seek your purposes and not be a human tool for somebody else. Jeff, what does all this have to do with education? You're talking about jobs and slavery. Well, it has everything to do with it. Romans called the classical subjects liberal arts, the arts of freedom, studies that are appropriate for a free man, not a slave, not a tool, a free man capable of self-direction, right? That's what liberal arts means, the arts of a free man. Why? Because a free man needs capacities that a tool doesn't need. A tool just needs to perform its function. It needs to do whatever you want it to do. A hammer doesn't need to think about whether hammering is the right action. It just hammers when someone swings it. But a free man has to determine his own course. He has to think clearly about what's true. He has to decide what's valuable for himself. He has to judge between competing claims, persuade others, understand complex situations, recognize patterns, make strategic decisions that there's no going back on. These are the capacities that education develops. Skill training won't give you any of that. The capacities that education gives you make you free, capable of self-direction rather than just responding to someone else's direction. Job training makes you useful. Education makes you free. Get that? Most men get training and think they're free because they have a paycheck. That's not freedom, man. They're just highly paid tools. Okay? Take away the paycheck and they're helpless because all they have is a utility to a specific employer in a specific economic context. The whole goal of education is to avoid putting yourself into that situation. Now listen, I'm not saying you should quit your job or you should not have a job. I'm just saying being realistic about what a job actually is. And don't confuse economic necessity with freedom. Now, this is going to sound strange for me, right? Because the boomers have been telling you the exact opposite, that everything depends on you having a job and being a slave to somebody else. Well, I'm not a boomer. I'm Gen X. I'm one of the first to rebel against the boomers. I'm the first generation to do that. I'm just saying, be real. Be realistic. This is a realist channel. Be realistic. Economic survival in the modern world does require participating in the labor market. Fine. Do it well. Be good at it. Develop valuable skills. Make yourself useful enough that you're well compensated. There's no virtue in poverty or being unemployed, but understand what you're doing. When you're at work, you're serving someone else's purposes. That's 8 hours a day that you're not serving your own. You're a tool in someone else's machine. Your thoughts, your time, your effort, they all belong to that person who's paying you. I mean, that's the deal you're making. There's no shame in it, but there's no point in pretending it's something that it's not, and a lot of men do. The danger here comes when men internalize this condition, when they start to believe that their value is their utility. Frankly, a lot of Christian men believe this today. They think, well, I'm being good at my job is the same as being capable. They imagine that economic success equals freedom, or that economic success is even the only possible goal for human life. But it's not. Economic success means you're a well-compensated tool. Now, that's better than being a poorly compensated tool, but you're still a tool, brother. Your purposes are still subordinate to someone else's purposes, and fundamentally, you're not free in a condition like that. Well, education, by contrast, gives you the capacities that are independent of any job. Nobody can take them from you. Even if they put you in prison, they can't take them from you. They're not dependent on any economic condition or employer decisions. They make you capable of self-direction regardless of economic circumstances. A man that's educated in philosophy can think precisely about what's true and what matters, whether he's employed or not. A man educated in rhetoric can persuade and argue, whether someone's paying him or not. A man educated in history can recognize patterns, learn from precedent, and make good predictions, regardless of his job title. A man educated in literature understands human nature, and it doesn't matter if an employer finds that useful or not, although many do. For example, Peter Thiel prefers to hire humanities people rather than engineering and technology people precisely because they're more imaginative and they see a horizon of possibilities that people who've been trained in physical disciplines don't have. What I'm saying is that these capacities that education gives you make you free in a way that job skills can never do, because they're not dependent on being useful to someone else. They're yours. They're part of who you are. They become you. They enable you to determine your own course and pursue your own purposes and make your own decisions. Frankly, I can't think of anything more valuable than that. And that's why the Romans educated their sons before they worried about what role they would play in economic or political life. They wanted men who were self-directed and capable first, and their usefulness would be a secondary artifact of that. They wanted men who could think for themselves, judge for themselves, act for themselves. Men who happened to have jobs, not men whose entire identity and capability was their job. They weren't looking for wage slaves. They were looking for self-directed men who could acquire power and use it. So the goal is to be educated enough that you're not dependent on just being a wage slave. And that requires two things. First, economic capacity that you're not desperate. You need skills that make you employable, and you need to be competent at something that people will pay for, and you need to be able to generate income. Otherwise, you're at the mercy of whoever will feed you. You know, Aristotle says that one of the first necessities of education is you have to have leisure time. And to acquire leisure time, you have to acquire some wealth. Second, you need enough education that you're not just a tool. You need the capacity to think precisely, judge situations. You know, these are the capacities of a free man, somebody capable of determining his own purposes rather than just serving others' purposes. Now, most men don't have either of these things. They're economically desperate. They're economically uninformed, sometimes malformed. They're dependent on jobs that they hate. They serve purposes they don't even believe in because they have no other option, no capacity to create those other options. Now, some men have the first, but not the second. They're economically successful. They're well paid, respect their field, secure, but they're still just sophisticated tools. They're very good at serving someone else's purposes, but they've never developed the capacity to determine their own purposes. They're trapped in golden handcuffs. That's the phrase that people use. You know, you're in golden handcuffs. You're well compensated, but you're far from free. And it may surprise you, but in ancient Athens, most of the slaves were rich. You know, the richest people in Athens were the ship pilots, the men who piloted the boats for trade, and they were all slaves, right? You can be a slave and still be well compensated. Very few men have both of these things. Very few men have both. Economic capacity and genuine education, all right? The ability to be useful when necessary and the capacity for self-direction when possible. These are the men who are genuinely free, not because they don't have jobs, but because they have jobs without being defined by their jobs. So I am telling you to basically think differently about it. I'm not saying don't have a job, but I am telling you to think differently about it. Clarify your relationship with your job, right? Your job is a transaction and you trade labor for money. Do it well, do it competently, extract maximum value from it. Just don't ever confuse it with your actual purpose or your actual identity. When you're at work, you're serving someone else's purposes. That's fine. That's social cooperation. That's the transaction. But when you're not at work, you should be serving your own purposes, developing your own capacities, pursuing your own understanding, and becoming more capable, not just more useful to somebody else. This is why men who retire and have nothing but their career just end up falling apart. A lot of them kill themselves. They were never anything but useful. And when they stop being useful, they feel that they don't have anything. They have no self beyond their utility to another person. This is somebody who's become so enslaved, they can't see any human purpose beyond their own slavery. Right? Don't be that son of a bitch. Be useful when it's needed. Get paid well for it, but build yourself as a person, not just as a tool. Study philosophy so you can think precisely. Study history. Study literature. Study rhetoric. Right? Develop capacities that make you capable of self-direction, not just a tool. And then when you're at work, you're there by choice, not by necessity. See the difference? You can endure anything if it's your own choice, right? You're free in the only way that matters. You are capable of determining your own course rather than just responding to economic pressure from slave masters. That's the difference between being a tool and being a man. Tools just do what they're designed to do. Men decide what to do and why. Education is what makes the difference between the two. Well, I will say that life requires more than most people understand. And the Romans understood this. When they educated their sons, they made sure that whatever the circumstances, they built on the strengths of their children and worked on their weaknesses. And this is the basic foundation of how you think about educating yourself, right? So I'm inviting you to do the same thing. Some of you may have problems with motivation. I think it's the wrong question. I mean, the question isn't, how do I stay motivated? The question is this: do I want to remain defective or do I want to fix myself? Do I want to stay a wage slave or do I want to be a free man? And every man is going to answer the right way to that. The only question is, do you have the will to start? Right? Here's the thing though. The pain of remaining broken is worse than the pain of fixing yourself. It seems the other way around, but let me assure you, as a man who's been through this, the pain of remaining broken and unformed or malformed is much worse than the pain of just fixing yourself, right? So it's worth the work is what I'm telling you. So what's the bottom line here? I'm saying diagnose your weaknesses honestly, prescribe specific subjects as remedies, study systematically, which involves reading, writing, and applying. Do it daily, make it a practice, never stop doing it. Eliminate your major defects, and then specialize in your strengths and push them to the point of excellence. Don't confuse in yourself or others credentials with capabilities. Don't confuse information consumption with formation. Lots of people know lots of facts, but they can't do anything with them. Don't confuse training for economic utility with education for human capability. There's a difference between indentured slavery, voluntary indentured slavery, which is what a job is, and being a self-directed man. Education is medicine for your mind. So take your damn medicine. Fix what's broken. Perfect what's strong. This is how you become a formidable man with gravitas in the world. The Romans understood what we forgot. Men are not born complete. They're born raw. Men are not born to express themselves in any way. Look, you aren't supposed to find this channel. The algorithm didn't recommend me. You found this because someone shared it or because you went looking for something the mainstream just won't give you. That's how real information moves now. Hand to hand, man to man, just like combat. I can't make it show you. I can't get YouTube to do what I want, but I can ask you to do one thing: subscribe and hit the bell. Not for me, for the next man looking for what you found. The gatekeepers control discovery. We control distribution. If this helped you, make sure you see the next one. Send it to someone who needs it. Cut through the bullshit. Hit subscribe, hit the bell. That's the play. They want. We're born to become free men, which means being educated in the deliberate process of turning raw nature into a refined capability. It's hard. It takes years. Most men won't do it. That's your advantage. Most men won't do it. Get off YouTube and go start your one-year program of study. Do the work. The Jeff Younger Show, signing off.